The Red Warning Boys had floated in the void for over 200 years, their messages clear in 700 different languages. Each one told the same story to anyone who approached the invisible line that marked human space. Do not cross. Do not engage. Do not provoke. The warnings were simple, direct, and had been respected by every intelligent species in the galaxy. Until today. Captain Thex studied the tactical display aboard his flagship, watching as the small human research vessel drifted just inside their territory. The ship was alone, vulnerable, and completely unaware that his battle fleet waited in the darkness beyond their sensors. His species, the Malthari, had built an empire by taking what others would not defend. They had claimed 12 star systems in the past decade, and the sight of these human boundaries had always annoyed him. What gave one species the right to claim so much space while contributing nothing to galactic civilization? The humans had isolated themselves centuries ago, hiding behind their red markers like frightened children. They traded with no one, shared no technology, and refused every invitation to join the greater galactic community. In Thex's mind, they had forfeited any right to their territory through their selfishness. The human ship, designated Terra Nova according to his intelligence officer, was conducting what appeared to be routine stellar mapping. Its crew of 47 included scientists, researchers, and their families. Thex had observed similar expeditions before, always staying just outside human space, always watching them work with their primitive equipment and outdated ships. Today would be different. "Sir, the human vessel is hailing us," reported his communications officer. "They're requesting safe passage back to their territory." Thex smiled. The humans still believed in diplomacy, still thought that words could solve every problem. His people had learned long ago that strength was the only language the universe truly understood. The weak begged for mercy, the strong took what they wanted, and the strongest made the rules. "Open fire," he ordered. The first salvo from his dreadnought's main guns struck the Terra Nova's shields, causing the small ship to shudder and list to one side. Emergency lights flickered across the human vessel's hull as its crew fought to maintain power. Thex watched with satisfaction as the ship's defensive systems struggled against his superior firepower. Inside the Terra Nova, Dr. Anna Walsh grabbed her daughter's hand as another explosion rocked their ship. The 12-year-old girl had been so excited to join this expedition, her first trip beyond Earth's solar system. Now terror filled her young eyes as sparks flew from damaged consoles and the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated. "Mom, what's happening?" the girl whispered. Anna tried to keep her voice steady. "Just stay close to me, sweetheart. Everything will be okay." But Anna knew it wouldn't be okay. The attackers had military-grade weapons, while the Terra Nova carried only basic defensive shields meant to protect against space debris. Their attackers weren't trying to disable the ship or take prisoners. They were trying to kill everyone aboard. The ship's captain, an elderly man named Roberts, activated the emergency communication system. His final message would be transmitted to Earth through a series of relay stations, carrying news of their fate to the human government. But more importantly, it would activate protocols that had remained dormant for 2 centuries. "This is Captain Roberts of the Terra Nova," he said into the microphone as explosions continued to tear his ship apart. "We are under attack by unknown forces. Repeat, human civilians are under attack. Implementing Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was not widely known, even among human military personnel. It had been established after the last Great War, when humanity had voluntarily isolated itself from galactic affairs. The protocol contained specific instructions for what to do if human territory was breached and human lives were lost to foreign aggression. Thex's weapons continued their devastating work. The Terra Nova's hull began to crack under the assault, atmosphere bleeding into space through dozens of small holes. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, but the damage was too extensive. The ship was dying, and everyone aboard knew it. Dr. Walsh held her daughter close as the final explosion tore through their section of the ship. Her last thought was of her husband back on Earth, and whether he would understand why she had brought their child on what was supposed to be a safe scientific mission. The Terra Nova broke apart in a brilliant flash of light, its pieces scattering across several thousand kilometers of space. 47 human beings died in the cold vacuum, their bodies lost among the debris of their ship. Thex ordered his crew to salvage what they could from the wreckage, hoping to find useful technology or valuable resources. What they found instead were personal effects, research data, and the ship's black box recorder. The recorder contained not just the crew's final moments, but also detailed information about human society, their scientific capabilities, and their peaceful intentions. Everything in the data suggested that the Terra Nova had been exactly what it appeared to be: a harmless research vessel crewed by civilians and their families. Thex felt no remorse. In his experience, the weak always tried to appear innocent, hoping to gain sympathy from their enemies. The fact that humans sent their families on these missions only proved how soft and unprepared they were for the realities of galactic politics. He ordered his fleet to return to Malthari space, where he would report the incident as a defensive action against human aggression. The Galactic Council would hear his version of events first, and by the time any human representatives arrived, the official record would already be established. The humans had attacked his ships, he would claim, forcing him to defend himself. As his fleet jumped to hyperspace, Thex looked back at the debris field that had once been the Terra Nova. In a few hours, the wreckage would be scattered by solar winds and gravitational forces, leaving no trace of what had happened. The 47 humans who died here would be forgotten by everyone except their families, and even they would eventually move on. Thex was wrong about many things, but his greatest mistake was believing that humans would simply accept this loss and return to their isolation. He had no way of knowing that every human ship carried more than just distress beacons and black box recorders. Hidden deep within their communication systems was something far more dangerous, a direct link to the most carefully guarded secret in human space. The signal from the Terra Nova had already reached its destination, and across human territory, ancient systems were beginning to wake up from their long sleep. The galaxy was about to learn why human territory had been marked as forbidden, and why that prohibition had been respected for so many years. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a bunker that had been carved from solid rock 3 centuries ago, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Stone sat in complete darkness. She preferred it this way when she needed to think. The weight of the mountain above her felt appropriate for the decisions she was about to make. Decisions that would reshape the galaxy. The emergency session had been called 3 hours ago when the automated systems detected Protocol 7 activation from the Terra Nova. Every member of the Human Defense Council had dropped whatever they were doing and traveled to this secure location, some from as far away as the outer colonies. They came by ship, by transport, and in a few cases by experimental teleportation devices that officially didn't exist. Stone had served in the military for 43 years, but she was old enough to remember the time before the isolation protocols. She remembered when humans had been active members of the galactic community, sharing technology and culture with dozens of alien species. She also remembered why that had ended. "Admiral, we have confirmation," said Director James Park, head of Human Intelligence Services. "The Terra Nova was destroyed by Malthari forces without provocation. 47 civilians dead, including children. The Malthari are already spreading their version of the story through diplomatic channels." Stone nodded slowly. She had hoped this day would never come, but she had spent decades preparing for it. Every human in this room had spent their entire careers preparing for it. The isolation protocols were not just a treaty with the galactic community. They were humanity's promise to itself that it would never again become what it had been during the Titan War. But the protocols contained exceptions. carefully written clauses that would only be activated under the most extreme circumstances. The unprovoked murder of human civilians in human space was one of those circumstances. "What's the status of our deep assets?" Stone asked. General Maria Santos, commander of Special Operations, consulted her tablet. "All sleeper fleets are operational and awaiting orders. Orbital platforms are powered up and ready. The hidden shipyards report full production capability. We can have the first wave deployed within 6 hours." Stone closed her eyes. The sleeper fleets were humanity's greatest secret and their greatest shame. Thousands of warships that had been disguised as mining platforms, research stations, and cargo haulers for over 2 centuries. Each one was equipped with weapons that violated every galactic treaty humans had ever signed. They had been built in secret, maintained in secret, and crewed by volunteers who had sworn to take their knowledge to the grave. "The Galactic Council will demand an investigation," said Ambassador Helen Wright, humanity's former representative to galactic affairs. "They'll want to mediate, to find a peaceful solution. That's what they always do." Stone opened her eyes and looked at each member of the council in turn. These were good people, dedicated public servants who had spent their careers trying to keep humanity safe through isolation and diplomacy. But they were also products of the same system that had created the Titan War, and they understood what their species was capable of when pushed beyond reason. "There will be no investigation," Stone said quietly. "There will be no mediation. There will be no peaceful solution. The Malthari killed our people in our space, and they will pay the price for that decision." The room fell silent. Everyone present knew what that meant, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that planning sessions and theoretical scenarios never could. Humanity was going to war, and when humans went to war, entire civilizations could disappear. Stone activated the holographic display in the center of the table. It showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions, with human territory marked in blue and the Malthari Confederacy highlighted in red. The Malthari controlled 12 star systems and commanded one of the largest military forces in their sector. Under normal circumstances, they would be considered nearly invincible. But Stone was not planning a normal war. "The Malthari have approximately 3,000 ships," she continued. "Their home world has a population of 2 billion. They've built their entire society around military conquest, and they've never faced a serious challenge to their power." She manipulated the display, showing human assets that had never appeared on any galactic database. Hidden bases, disguised warships, and weapon platforms that existed in the spaces between official records. The true scope of human military capability revealed itself like a flower, opening its petals to the sun. "We will deploy 47 fleets," Stone announced. "One for each person who died on the Terra Nova. Each fleet will be larger than the entire Malthari Navy. Each will be equipped with weapons that the galactic community believes are impossible to build." General Santos leaned forward. "Admiral, that level of deployment will reveal capabilities we've kept secret for centuries. Once we show the galaxy what we can really do, there's no going back to the old isolation." Stone nodded. "I know, but the Malthari made that choice for us when they opened fire on civilians. The galaxy needs to remember why we isolated ourselves, and why that isolation was in everyone's best interest." She stood up and walked to the window that looked out into the main operations center. Hundreds of people worked at consoles, coordinating the activation of systems that had remained dormant for generations. They moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for operations that they had trained for but never expected to execute. "Send the activation codes to all sleeper assets," Stone ordered. "Full deployment, all theaters. I want every hidden base online and every disguised ship ready for combat within 12 hours. "What about the Galactic Council?" Ambassador Wright asked. "They'll try to intervene once they realize what we're doing." Stone smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Let them try. They'll learn the same lesson as the Malthari. Some lines should never be crossed." Across human space, the activation codes triggered responses that had been built into the fabric of human civilization. Mining stations revealed themselves to be fortress worlds. Cargo ships shed their outer hulls to expose weapon systems that could crack planets. Research facilities opened hidden bays containing fleets of warships that existed in no official records. The transformation was absolute and irreversible. In the space of a few hours, humanity revealed itself to be not the peaceful, isolated species the galaxy thought it knew, but something far more dangerous. They had spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment, building weapons and training soldiers while pretending to be harmless researchers and farmers. Stone watched the deployment reports flood in from across human territory. Every hidden asset was coming online exactly as planned. Every secret base was operational. Every sleeper agent was ready to execute their long, dormant orders. The galaxy had forgotten the lessons of the Titan War, forgotten why humanity had been allowed to claim such vast territories without challenge. They had mistaken isolation for weakness, patience for fear, and peace for pacifism. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. "Admiral," called the communications officer, "we're receiving surrender offers from 6 different species. They're offering to turn over anyone connected to the Terra Nova incident." Stone wasn't surprised. The galaxy's intelligence networks were extensive, and news of human military activation would spread quickly. Species that had never heard of the Terra Nova would soon be offering apologies for crimes they hadn't committed, desperate to avoid becoming targets of human retribution. "Tell them we appreciate their cooperation," Stone replied. "But our business is with the Malthari. Anyone who interferes will be treated as a hostile force." The die was cast. Humanity had chosen war over peace, retribution over forgiveness, and power over isolation. The galaxy would learn to fear them again, just as it had during the dark days of the Titan War. But this time, things would be different. This time, humanity would not stop until the lesson was learned by everyone. The Malthari home world of Korath had never been attacked. In 12 centuries of expansion and conquest, no enemy force had ever managed to penetrate the outer defense grid, let alone threaten the capital city where 2 billion Malthari citizens went about their daily lives. The massive orbital stations that protected their world were considered impregnable, equipped with the most advanced weapons technology their military engineers could design. General Vrak stood on the observation deck of the primary defense station, watching as his sensors detected the approaching human fleet. What he saw made no sense according to everything his people knew about human capabilities. The formation that emerged from hyperspace contained more ships than most species possessed in their entire navy, and their size classifications didn't match anything in the galactic database. "Sir, we're receiving over 10,000 distinct signatures," reported his sensor operator, voice tight with disbelief. "The computer can't match most of their ship designs to any known patterns." Vrak had commanded the home defense fleet for 30 years. He had overseen the conquest of 6 worlds and the subjugation of 3 different species. His military record was flawless, his tactical knowledge encyclopedic, and his confidence in Malthari superiority absolute. But as he watched the human fleet arrange itself in perfect formation just outside weapons range, he felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. The lead human vessel was larger than anything he had ever seen. It dwarfed the Malthari command ship, its hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. Weapon ports dotted its surface like stars in the night sky, each one capable of mounting weapons systems that shouldn't have been possible to construct. The ship's very presence seemed to bend space around it, creating gravitational effects that registered on sensors throughout the system. "General, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet," announced his communications officer. The main display activated, showing a human woman in a military uniform that bore no decorations or medals. Her age was difficult to determine, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much war. When she spoke, her voice carried across every communication channel in the Malthari system. I am Fleet Admiral Rebecca Stone of the Human Defense Force. You have committed an act of unprovoked aggression against human civilians in human space. You have 36 hours to surrender every individual involved in the attack on the Terra. Nova, you have 48 hours to submit your entire military command structure for trial. After that, we stop asking nicely. General Vrak had never been spoken to with such casual authority, especially not by a member of a species, his people, considered weak and isolated. The suggestion that the mighty Malthari Confederacy should surrender to anyone was so absurd that he almost laughed. His defense fleet numbered over 3,000 ships, each one crewed by battle-tested warriors who had never known defeat. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let me speak to this admiral." When the connection was established, Vrak drew himself up to his full height and activated the translation protocols that would allow the humans to understand his response. "I am General Vrak, Supreme Commander of Malthari Home Defense. Your people attacked our ships without provocation, and Captain Thex acted in self-defense. We will submit to no investigation and surrender nothing to your inferior species." Admiral Stone's expression didn't change. "Then you have chosen poorly, General. My condolences to your families." The transmission cut off, leaving Vrak staring at a blank screen. The dismissal was so complete, so utterly without fear or concern, that it took him a moment to process what had happened. No one had ever dismissed him like that. No one had ever dared. "Sir, the human fleet is moving to attack formation," reported his tactical officer. Vrak activated his command systems and opened channels to every ship in his fleet. "All vessels prepare for combat. These humans think they can intimidate us with superior numbers, but they've never faced Malthari military might. Today we show them the price of threatening our people." The battle began exactly 4 minutes later. The human fleet moved like a single living organism, each ship perfectly coordinated with every other vessel in a display of tactical precision that should have been impossible to achieve. Their weapons fired in synchronized volleys, creating devastating concentrations of firepower that overwhelmed individual targets before moving on to the next. But it wasn't just the coordination that shocked Vrak. It was the weapons themselves. The humans fired projectiles that seemed to bend space around them, creating localized gravitational fields that crushed Malthari ships from within. Energy beams that changed frequency mid-flight, adapting to overcome defensive countermeasures in real time. And most terrifying of all, weapons that seemed to target not just the ships themselves, but the space around them, making it impossible for damaged vessels to retreat or call for reinforcements. Vrak watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Ships that had served with distinction for decades were destroyed in seconds. Crews that had fought 100 battles were vaporized without being able to return fire. The Malthari weapons that had conquered 12 star systems proved utterly ineffective against human defensive systems that seemed to anticipate every attack before it was launched. "Sir, we've lost over half the fleet," reported his tactical officer, voice shaking. "Our weapons aren't even scratching their shields." Vrak tried to maintain his composure, tried to find some tactical advantage that could turn the tide of battle. But as he watched another squadron of his finest ships disappear in brilliant explosions, he realized that this wasn't a battle at all. It was an execution. "All ships, retreat to secondary positions," he ordered. "Fall back to the inner defense grid." But when his ships tried to jump to hyperspace, they discovered that their exit vectors had been blocked. Somehow the humans had prevented any form of faster-than-light travel within the entire star system. His fleet was trapped, unable to retreat or call for reinforcements from other Malthari worlds. The slaughter continued for another 2 minutes before the last Malthari ship was destroyed. 3,000 vessels, the pride of the Confederacies. Military had been eliminated without destroying a single human ship. Most of the human fleet hadn't even fired their weapons. Vrak stood alone on his command deck, watching as the human fleet arranged itself around the now defenseless planet. The orbital defense stations that had protected Korath for centuries were floating debris, their massive gun batteries silenced forever. Below, 2 billion Malthari civilians waited to learn their fate. Admiral Stone's voice filled the communications channels once again. The Malthari Confederacy has ceased to exist. Your worlds are now under human administration. Your people will be relocated to ensure they can no longer threaten innocent civilians. This is what happens when you breach human territory. As Vrak watched, transport ships began launching from the human fleet. Not troop transports, but civilian evacuation vessels. The humans weren't planning to occupy Malthari worlds or enslave their people. They were going to empty them entirely, relocating every Malthari citizen to other worlds where they could start over under strict supervision. The Confederacy that had taken 12 centuries to build was being dismantled in a matter of hours. But more than that, the galaxy was witnessing something it hadn't seen in over 200 years. Humanity at war. The peaceful, isolated species that had hidden behind their red boundary markers had revealed themselves to be the most advanced military force in known space. Vrak's personal communicator activated, showing an incoming message from Admiral Stone. When he opened the channel, he found himself face to face with the human who had just destroyed everything his people had built. "General, you and your senior staff will be transported to Earth for trial," she said calmly. "You will answer for the murder of 47 innocent people, including children. Your cooperation will be noted favorably by the court." Vrak had no words. His entire worldview had been shattered in the space of 4 minutes. The species he had considered weak and backwards had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in the galactic database. They had destroyed his fleet, conquered his world, and dismantled his civilization with an efficiency that spoke to centuries of preparation. As human security forces boarded his station to take him into custody, Vrak realized that he had made the same mistake as countless others throughout galactic history. He had mistaken patience for weakness, isolation for fear, and peace for inability to wage war. The humans had spent 200 years in isolation, but they hadn't been hiding. They had been preparing. And now the galaxy would learn what they had been preparing for. Ambassador Kern had lived for 3 centuries, long enough to witness the rise and fall of a dozen galactic civilizations. As the oldest serving member of the Galactic Council, he had access to historical records that most species had forgotten existed. Now, as he sat in the Council's emergency session chamber, he wished he could forget what those records contained. The holographic displays surrounding the Council chamber showed real-time updates from across the galaxy. Human fleets had appeared in 17 different sectors simultaneously, each one carrying the same ultimatum that had been delivered to the Malthari: surrender those responsible for approving the Terra Nova attack, or face the consequences. What made the situation truly terrifying was that most of these species had never even heard of the Terra Nova incident before today. "How could we not have known?" demanded Counselor Vex of the Silicon Collective, his artificial voice crackling with static that indicated extreme distress in his species. "How could an entire species possess this level of military capability without our intelligence services detecting it?" Kieran accessed the classified files that he had hoped never to open again. The data that appeared on his personal display made his blood run cold, even though he had seen it many times before. Documents from the Titan War, sealed. By mutual agreement 2 centuries ago, when humanity had voluntarily withdrawn from galactic affairs. "We did know," Kern said quietly, his words bringing silence to the chaotic session. "At least, some of us knew. The problem is that institutional memory fades, and the beings who made the original agreements with humanity are long dead." He activated the main display, showing records from the Titan War that most council members had never seen. Stellar maps showing entire star systems reduced to asteroid fields. Military reports describing weapons that could destabilize stars and gravitational fields that could crush planets. And at the center of it all, the species that had ended the most destructive war in galactic history, humanity. The humans weren't victims in the Titan War, Kern continued. They were the weapon that ended it. When the Titan Imperium threatened to consume the entire galaxy, humanity revealed military capabilities that no one had suspected they possessed. In 6 months, they reduced the most powerful empire in galactic history to scattered refugees. Counselor Thrall of the Jarathi Union, a species known for their military prowess, leaned forward in his chair. That's impossible. The historical records show that humanity joined the galactic community as explorers and scientists. They were never a military power. Kern smiled sadly. The humans who joined our community were explorers and scientists, but they were also the survivors of species-wide conflicts that had lasted for centuries on their home world. When they finally achieved interstellar travel, they brought with them the accumulated military knowledge of dozens of different cultures, all refined through generations of warfare. The display changed, showing detailed analyses of human society from before the isolation protocols. Hidden behind their reputation as peaceful researchers were military academies that produced the finest strategic minds in the galaxy. Disguised as civilian research stations were weapons laboratories developing technology that violated every existing treaty, and scattered throughout human space were industrial facilities capable of producing warships at a rate that could outfit entire fleets in a matter of weeks. The isolation protocols weren't a surrender, Kern explained. They were a containment system. Humanity voluntarily withdrew from galactic affairs because they understood what they were capable of when threatened. The red boundary markers weren't meant to keep us out. They were meant to keep them in. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. For 2 centuries, the galaxy had believed that humanity was a peaceful species that preferred isolation to engagement. In reality, they were the most dangerous military force in known space, choosing to limit their own power rather than risk another catastrophe like the Titan War. "Sir," called one of the Council's intelligence officers, "we're receiving surrender transmissions from multiple sectors. The Vegan Republic has handed over their entire high command. The Andromedans are offering territorial concessions. The Helix Consortium is requesting immediate asylum for their leadership." None of these species had been involved in the Terra Nova incident, but they clearly understood what humanity's emergence meant for the galactic balance of power. Species that had never feared anything were surrendering to prevent becoming targets of human retribution. "What do they want?" asked Counselor Vex. "The humans, I mean. What are their territorial demands? Their resource requirements? What price are they asking for their withdrawal?" Kern consulted the most recent communications from Admiral Stone's fleet. What he found surprised him, even knowing what he knew about human psychology and their approach to warfare. "They don't want anything," he said slowly. "No territory, no resources, no tribute. They want justice for the Terra Nova massacre, and they want assurance that human space will never be breached again." The other counselors exchanged confused glances. In their experience, military conquests always led to territorial expansion or resource extraction. The idea of a species deploying overwhelming force without seeking material gain was almost incomprehensible. "That makes no sense," protested Counselor Thrall. "Why reveal this level of capability if they don't intend to use it for expansion?" Before Kern could answer, the chamber's main communication system activated. Admiral Stone's image appeared on the central display, her expression calm but implacable. She looked directly at each council member in turn, as if she could see them through the communication link. "Honorable counselors," she began, "I understand you're seeking to mediate this conflict and find a peaceful resolution. I appreciate your intentions, but there will be no mediation. The Malthari Confederacy has been dissolved. Their leadership will stand trial for war crimes. Their people will be relocated under human supervision until we are satisfied they no longer pose a threat to innocent civilians." Counselor Vex activated his response system. Admiral Stone, surely we can find a compromise that satisfies all parties. The Galactic Council has extensive experience in resolving conflicts of this nature. Stone's smile held no warmth. Counselor, this isn't a conflict. It's a consequence. The Malthari chose to murder human civilians in human space. They will now live with the results of that choice. Any species that interferes in our operations will be treated as a hostile force. The transmission ended, leaving the Council to contemplate the new reality they faced. Humanity had not asked for permission, sought approval, or requested assistance. They had simply acted with a speed and decisiveness that spoke to centuries of planning. What about the other species? Asked another counselor. The ones that are surrendering preemptively? Kieran checked the latest intelligence reports. Admiral Stone has assured them that humanity has no quarrel with anyone except the Malthari and their allies. As long as they don't interfere with human operations, they'll be left alone. But even as he said it, Kern knew that things would never be the same. The galaxy had been shown that their most peaceful neighbors were actually their most dangerous, that the species they had dismissed as isolationist hermits possessed military capabilities that exceeded anything in their databases. The balance of power had shifted in a matter of hours, and there was no going back. Sir, called the intelligence officer again, we're receiving reports from the Outer Rim. Human fleets are engaging pirate bases and criminal organizations throughout the frontier sectors. They're not just targeting the Malthari anymore. Kieran nodded grimly. Humanity wasn't content to simply punish those responsible for the Terra Nova massacre. They were using this opportunity to reshape the entire galactic order, eliminating threats and establishing their authority throughout known space. The galaxy had learned why human territory was forbidden, but the lesson was just beginning. 1 year had passed since the Terra Nova incident, and the galaxy barely resembled the chaotic collection of competing powers it had been before. Trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for centuries now ran smoothly under human protection. Border conflicts that had raged for decades had ended overnight when human observers arrived to monitor ceasefire agreements. The criminal organizations that had operated with impunity in the Outer Rim had simply vanished, their bases destroyed and their leadership scattered. Dr. Marcus Webb, a xenobiologist who had spent his career studying alien cultures, found himself in the unexpected position of serving as humanity's first ambassador to galactic affairs since the isolation protocols were established. He walked through the corridors of the rebuilt council chambers, noting how different the atmosphere had become. Where once there had been constant arguments and petty power struggles, now there was an almost nervous politeness among the various species representatives. Webb had volunteered for this position because he believed in humanity's capacity for both justice and mercy. The past year had proven him right on both counts. The Malthari leadership had been tried and convicted for their crimes, but their people had been relocated to fertile worlds where they could rebuild their society under human guidance. Species that had surrendered immediately had been treated with respect and allowed to maintain their autonomy, while those who had resisted found themselves under much stricter supervision. Ambassador Webb, called a familiar voice from behind him. He turned to see Ambassador Kern approaching, the elderly alien moving slowly but with dignity intact. Despite representing a government that had initially opposed human intervention, Kern had become one of Webb's closest allies in the restructured council. Kern, good to see you. How are the integration protocols progressing? The old ambassador gestured to a nearby observation deck where they could speak privately while watching the steady stream of ships moving through the system's main shipping lanes. The volume of traffic had tripled since human peacekeeping forces took control of the major trade routes. Better than anyone expected, Kieran admitted. The Rigel Consortium reports a 40% increase in trade volume. The Centauri Federation has started their first expansion in 50 years. Even species that were initially hostile to human Intervention are beginning to appreciate the benefits of galactic stability. Webb nodded. The transformation had been remarkable, but it hadn't been achieved through force alone. Admiral Stone had been very specific about the rules of engagement for human peacekeeping forces. They were to prevent conflicts, not create them. Protect the weak, not dominate them. Ensure fair trade, not control it. What about resistance movements? Webb asked. I've heard rumors of species trying to organize against human authority. Kieran smiled sadly. There have been attempts, but they never gain any real momentum. The galaxy remembers what happened to the Malthari, and no one wants to test humanity's patience again. More importantly, most species are discovering that they're better off under the current system than they were before. This was the aspect of human intervention that Webb found most interesting. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy in any traditional sense. They had not imposed their government on other species, demanded tribute, or claimed new territories. Instead, they had created a system where smaller species could thrive without fear of being absorbed by larger powers, where trade disputes were resolved fairly, and where conflicts were prevented rather than punished. There's something else, Kern continued, his tone becoming more serious. We've received communication from the Andromeda Galaxy. Apparently, they've been monitoring our situation, and they want to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. Webb raised an eyebrow. Contact with other galaxies was theoretical at best, requiring technology that most species considered impossible to develop. The fact that another galactic civilization had reached out suggested that humanity's actions had attracted attention on a truly cosmic scale. What's Admiral Stone's response? Webb asked. She's agreed to preliminary discussions, but she's made it clear that humanity's primary focus remains on stabilizing our own galaxy first. Apparently, the Andromedans have been dealing with their own version of expansionist empires, and they're interested in learning from our approach. The two ambassadors stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as a convoy of mixed-species cargo ships passed by under the protection of human escort vessels. The sight would have been impossible a year ago, when species like the Altarians and Vecthari had been locked in bitter territorial disputes. Now their ships traveled together safely, their differences set aside in favor of mutual prosperity. Webb's communicator chimed, indicating an incoming message from Earth. He activated the privacy screen and opened the transmission, finding himself face-to-face with Admiral Stone herself. Even after a year of working together, he still found her presence somewhat intimidating. Ambassador, I need you to prepare for a significant announcement, Stone said without preamble. We're beginning the next phase of galactic integration. What kind of announcement, Admiral? Stone's expression softened slightly. We're opening human space to limited immigration and cultural exchange. Selected representatives from allied species will be allowed to establish embassies on Earth and our colony worlds. It's time to start building the kind of galactic community we should have had centuries ago. Webb felt a surge of excitement. This represented a fundamental shift in human policy, moving from isolated peacekeeping to active community building. It also meant that his role as ambassador would become far more complex and important. There will be conditions, of course, Stone continued. Any species that wants to participate must demonstrate a commitment to peaceful cooperation and respect for individual rights. We won't tolerate the kind of authoritarian systems that have dominated galactic politics for so long. After the transmission ended, Webb shared the news with Kern, who listened with growing amazement. This changes everything, the old ambassador said. Your people aren't just maintaining order anymore. You're actively reshaping galactic civilization. Webb nodded. That's always been the plan, even if it wasn't obvious at first. Admiral Stone believes that the only way to prevent future conflicts like the Terra Nova incident is to create a system where such conflicts become impossible. They were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Lisa Park, one of Admiral Stone's senior staff officers. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had just completed a difficult but successful mission. "Ambassador Webb, I bring greetings from the former Malthari colonies," she said. "The integration process is complete. All relocated populations have been settled on their new worlds, and the first generation of children born under human supervision are beginning school programs that emphasize cooperation over conquest." This was perhaps humanity's greatest achievement. Rather than simply destroying the Malthari Confederacy, they had taken responsibility for rebuilding it into something better. The process had taken a full year and required the efforts of thousands of human administrators, teachers, and counselors, but the results spoke for themselves. "How are they adapting?" Webb asked. "Better than anyone expected. The older generation still struggles with the changes, but the younger Malthari are embracing the new system. They're learning to see strength in cooperation rather than domination, and their natural tactical abilities are being channeled into productive purposes rather than military conquest." Captain Park handed Webb a datapad containing progress reports from dozens of former Malthari worlds. Agricultural production was up, crime rates were down, and educational achievements were exceeding all projections. More importantly, surveys showed that most Malthari citizens were happier under the new system than they had been under their old military hierarchy. "There's something else," Park continued. "The Malthari Youth Council has formally requested permission to establish a monument to the Terra Nova victims. They want to ensure that future generations understand the consequences of unprovoked violence." Webb smiled. This was exactly the kind of cultural shift that Admiral Stone had hoped to achieve. The Malthari weren't being punished indefinitely for their past crimes. They were being given the opportunity to learn from them and build a better society. As Captain Park departed to continue her rounds, Webb and Kern returned to their observation of the shipping lanes. The steady flow of commerce represented more than just economic activity. It symbolized a galaxy where different species could work together for mutual benefit, where conflicts were resolved through dialogue rather than warfare, and where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them. "Do you think it will last?" Kern asked. "This new order, I mean. History is full of empires that promised peace and stability, only to become oppressive themselves over time." Webb considered the question carefully. It was something that kept him awake at night sometimes. The fear that humanity might eventually succumb to the same temptations that had corrupted so many other species throughout galactic history. "I think the key difference is that we're not building an empire," he said finally. "We're not trying to rule other species or impose our culture on them. We're simply ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to develop their own society without interference from aggressive neighbors." "And if humanity itself becomes aggressive? What safeguards exist against that possibility?" Webb smiled, thinking of the countless debates and discussions that had shaped human policy over the past year. The same thing that kept us isolated for 2 centuries. We remember what we're capable of, and we choose not to use that capability unless absolutely necessary. The Terra Nova incident reminded us why we isolated ourselves in the first place, but it also showed us that isolation isn't always possible. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that echoed throughout the council chambers. Ambassador Stone's voice, broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in the galaxy, carried the news that would define the next era of galactic civilization. "Citizens of the galaxy, 1 year ago, an act of unprovoked violence shattered the peace that had existed for centuries. Today, we announce the establishment of the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, a voluntary association of species committed to mutual support, fair trade, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Humanity offers our protection and partnership to any species willing to embrace these principles." Webb watched as the display screens throughout the observation deck lit up with incoming messages. Dozens of species were requesting immediate membership in the new organization, while others were asking for time to restructure their governments to meet human requirements. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in centuries, it was changing for the better. The red boundary markers that had once warned others to stay away from human space had been replaced with beacons that welcomed peaceful visitors while still warning potential aggressors that human territory remained inviolate. The lesson of the Terra Nova had been learned, but more importantly, it had been transformed from a tragedy into the foundation of something better. Humanity had emerged from isolation not as conquerors, but as guardians of a galaxy that finally had the chance to reach its full potential. As Webb prepared to return to his office to begin processing the flood of membership applications, he reflected on how much had changed since that terrible day when 47 innocent people had died in the cold vacuum of space. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. It had awakened humanity to its responsibilities and given the galaxy the leadership it had needed for so long. The new order was just beginning,